now you guys are in for a very special treat, and you'll understand why I had to bump off the Outlandish Corner this evening. You guys ready? Okay, I'm going to introduce my guest. So Walter Bosley has spent almost 20 years in national security investigations and operations and is currently a licensed private investigator. Bosley founded his own publishing label in 2002 and has since written 8 works of fiction and 9 nonfiction books. Holy cannoli, that's a lot more than me. Bosley dabbles in micro-budget indie filmmaking, and he has also appeared on History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Mysteries of National Parks on the Travel Channel, and his magazine articles have appeared in World Explorer magazine and Fate magazine. You guys should know those ones, all right? So awesome. Bosley's most recent works are Shimmering Light, Lost in an MK Ultra, House of Anu, and Destination Carcosa. I hope that's how you say it. Ambrose Bierce and the Empire of the Wheel. Everybody give a round of applause to Walter Bosley. Walter, have a seat. How are you doing this evening?
Good, great. How are you?
Life is fantastic and hot. It's very hot right now.
Yeah, we're having really nice, cool weather right now. So you guys got all our heat, I guess.
Oh, you're in California. I did hear that. I have a lot of friends over there, and they're like 70s. I'm like, I would kill for 70s.
For the last several years, we've had these darn 99-degree Halloweens that we're getting tired of. But if it stays like this, it might be nice.
That is, wow, that's pretty cool. And no wildfires, right? No wildfires. I don't want those, right?
Not lately.
My goodness. So, well, that's good to hear. So, do tell you. Oh my gosh, you've been in this for a long time. I mean, you started your publishing company in 2002. Mm-hmm. What possessed you? I know what possessed me to write my first book in 97. So, what possessed you to perk up and say, I better write this thing?
Well, my first love was cinema, and I started making, little films, Super 8 films, in junior high and through high school. And it was really, English was always my best subject in school. So by the time I got into high school, I started taking writing seriously. And at the same time I was doing filmmaking, I started writing screenplays and started taking that seriously when I was in college. And I continued writing. We're talking fiction, of course, fiction and screenplays through, high school, through college, and even in my early days of my career doing that other stuff. I continued to write screenplays and would try to sell them and stuff. And so after all these years of writing, I get into really what was my best money-making job I've ever had. So I, was thinking, maybe I ought to, throw some of this money at one of my passions. And originally in 2002, I was kind of inspired or moved to do a magazine. And I thought, well, why just a magazine? Why not a publishing company? And in that same year, I had gone on 2 trips through central Mexico with David Childress and, the Adventures Unlimited World Explorer group. I did 2 of those Mexico trips that year. And I looked at David Childress's working model for AUP and what he does, and I said, you know what, I'd kind of like to take the same working model and apply that to fiction. So that's how I stood up Lost Continent Library in 2002. Started out purely as, adventure pulp fiction. Later on, I got into the nonfiction.
Holy smokes. Huh. Yeah. Well, that's quite a feat. So I don't know about you, but it's like when I go to sit and write a book, and right when I think, hey, I don't think I'll ever have to write another one. I think I got it all out just now. And it's like, nope, I didn't. I got to do another one. So
that's right.
And then you have always like a manuscript or 5 sitting around. So how many have you not published?
Well, let's see. I had, like I said, I had written some, screenplays over the years through college and then through, the course of my other career. And in, between probably the late 90s and 2005, I had 2 or 3 particular ones that I had written, and then I wrote 3 or 4 more that I've been turning into my pulp novels that I've been coming out with for the last few years. And so those were literally manuscripts laying around that I just, in the cases of the scripts, I just adapted them to novels. But I had published a couple of novels previously before the pulps. I've pretty much, except for a couple of cases, I think I've run out of the ones that have been laying around. I think except for 2, I've converted them all and got them out there. So I'm going to have to be starting some fresh stuff here pretty soon on the fiction front.
Oh, wow. My goodness. Now, the
nonfiction,
that's
I don't put books out there just to have a book out there. Sincerely, my nonfiction books all are born out of the research I've done. Now, yes, sometimes when I'm in the middle of one book, I realize, okay, wow, I've stumbled upon some other information here, and I'll set that aside for a book later. That's what happened with the Ambrose Bierce book. I was working on the Richard Francis Burton book, Secret Missions 2, and I stumbled upon the Bierce material that motivated me to write that, and I set that aside for like a year and went back to it. But I never have, I don't have this plan where I see my next 5 nonfiction books, and I sure as heck don't crank it out just to have a book out. All of my books so far, knock on wood, have been truly inspired by the research.
Oh, amazing. So, well, it's starting from the beginning of these nonfiction books. So what was that first one, and what was the topic matter?
The first one was Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom. And that actually happened out of a conversation I was having with Greg Bishop on his podcast. And we were talking about why is Club 33 the kind of, it used to be more exclusive, but it still kind of is because it's expensive to be a member of Club 33. But it's the exclusive membership restaurant in Disneyland here in Anaheim. And it's called Club 33, and we were just yapping about, why is it called Club 33? So, on air, we start, going on, Googling this, that, and the other, and we discovered that night that Disneyland is at the 33rd degree of latitude. And, of course, what comes with that, as your listeners probably know, are the ancient pyramids and all these other weird, it's in that zone of weirdness around the planet. Yeah, and what got us started on talking about weirdness at Disneyland was an experience I had there, very strange experience back in 1981, that had haunted me for years. Well, between that haunting me for years and this conversation with Greg Bishop on his show when we discovered the Latitude 33 thing, I realized, you know what, I need to write a book about this. And that became my first nonfiction book, which I think was first released in 2008.
Wow, that's fascinating. I've not heard of this Club 33. I almost wanted to be a member when you said Disney, but now I'm backing up. I really am. Wow. Well, Mickey's not our friend. Are we talking about dark stuff, or are we talking about mystical stuff?
Well, mystical, because actually what the book is about is the esoteric engineering, physical engineering that went into the park. What I discovered, blew my mind. It's not an anti-Disney book at all. It's not one of those Walt Disney was an evil guy books at all. In fact, in my research, I dug out and found out that Walt Disney was never a Mason. I'll say that again because I constantly get people, Walt Disney was not a Mason. He had been in D. Malay in high school, which is, yes, Masonic affiliated, but that he was never made a Mason. I am a Mason, so I know how to ask.
I was just going to say, what's so evil about him? Masons, I know people in my family that were.
Yeah, it's, on the higher, deeper levels, there are some issues. People have been known to use Masonry for nefarious purposes, but
Christianity, too. They killed people, didn't they?
Yeah. Walt Disney was never a Mason. That's one of the things I found out. But the more interesting thing on what the book is about is I discovered that the guy who designed the physical Disneyland, who engineered it, the Disneys met at SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. Now, those are the guys involved with the creation of scientific remote viewing and all sorts of other interesting, weird esoterica. And this guy was very much into psychic phenomena and things like that. And he was hired away from SRI by the Disneys to be the chief engineer of Disneyland. And what my book does is it presents all the stuff that's in Disneyland that most people don't realize is very mystical and hermetic and occultic, not in a bad way. I mean it alchemically. And it gets into the history of this guy and his engineering of the park, and my theory that Disneyland itself, physical Disneyland, was designed to be a psychotronic device. And the operative mechanism that made it all work was the carousel. But when they redesigned Fantasyland, the carousel was moved several feet back, and I think that disengaged the device that the park is, because it sat on what has been suggested to me by a guy who provides me with this information on telluric currents, on the intersection of three telluric currents, or popularly called ley lines, but that is technically an incorrect term. But the three currents of Earth grid energy apparently intersect right there in Disneyland, in Fantasyland, and the carousel used to sit right on top of that intersection. It does not anymore. And the book gets into changes in the park since then, but that's what the Disneyland book is all about. And of course, I discuss my weird experience I had there and how that ties in with these other things I'm talking about regarding. So
is the book? It's not titled "The Happiest Place on Earth," and here's why. I'm just kidding.
It kind of goes to that. It's like here's why it was. But yeah, it's Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom. I'd have to look on the darn cover of the book. I think the Hermetic Engineering of the Happiest Place on Earth or something like that. Uh-huh. I'll walk over here to my shelf and pull the book off and take a look. It is Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom, the Arcane Science and Hermetic Engineering of the Happiest Place on Earth. That's the title.
Ah, nice. Well, I mean, you have too many books. So you're allowed to, not remember 100% all of it. I mean, even I only have 6 books out, and I'm like, what was that subtitle? So I get it. So, and then book 2. So we're creeping up your bookshelf here. Uh-huh. What was that on? Nonfiction.
Ooh, that was when I kicked off the Empire of the Wheel books, because about the time that I was finishing up my investigation on Disneyland and working on that book, I had fallen headlong into some very deep weirdness as a result of remote viewing, as a matter of fact. And wow. I was actually following up on the Disneyland research, because one of these 3 telluric currents I talked about intersecting in the park, 2 of them actually, they if you follow them out of the park in the northeastern direction, they curve outward in the direction of what we call the Inland Empire out here. Californians out here will know what I mean. It's east of where Disneyland is. It's about halfway between Palm Springs and Los Angeles. 2 of these lines that intersect at Disneyland pass through this area, okay? And so I wanted to research if there was any strange, relative phenomena that had been reported in the area. And that's when I learned about a haunting, reports of a haunting at the local mall that's been around here since 1967 called the Inland Center. So when I went to follow up on that, I met a librarian, Ann Walker, who introduced me to the Cora Stanton mystery. She's the one that had posted the ghost stories. She told me the very interesting tales of the lady ghost that haunted one of the department stores. I talk about that in the first Empire of the Wheel book. She said, go to the library, look up the old newspaper reports. You'll see there's something funny going on. And sure enough, I agreed with her. Not only did I think something funny was going on, I found 6 other deaths that happened within days or weeks of this mystery woman named Cora Stanton's death. And, my gut instinct as an investigator and just as a person was there was some type of serial murders going on here. This is very strange.
Sacrifices, it sounds like. My goodness.
Exactly. And, boy, from there, I dived into it, and there was just esoteric, mystical, alchemical, dark occult stuff, you name it, that was just jumping out of these reports. And it had not been talked about or written about by anyone for almost 100 years. It was as if it was something that San Bernardino wanted deeply buried. And I think they still do, because, I've had some interesting reactions from some places here when I was investigating. I've been followed. I was followed from, around my neighborhood. I had, someone at the coroner's office act really weird in a hostile manner towards me when I was, requesting a nearly 100-year-old report. Just really interesting stuff. And anyway, all of that led to the first Empire of the Wheel book. And then as I pulled more thread, that ended up expanding into 3 books.
Holy smoke. So, well, I don't know any city that wants to shed light on blood and torture of people, so I get it. It's like, man, he's going to bring down our population. Everybody's going to want to move out or something. I don't know.
Right. Also, when I was investigating the first book, early on, I had stumbled upon the stuff that led to, when I was investigating the first Empire of the Wheel book, I was talking about how when I was doing the Burton book, the Bierce book emerged out of that research. Well, the Secret Missions 1 about Juan Cabrillo, that emerged out of the Empire of the Wheel investigation. And that kind of sat there for a while until I could get to it. So really, and I discovered this as I went along, and I've said this before recently, all of my nonfiction books have a legitimate thread of connection when you read them all. You see that there is this thread of connection to all of them.
I had a feeling, and looking at the books that I have here of yours, it's like, a person just doesn't start off where you're at right now. It's just like, hold on, in fact, let's touch on that. So Shimmering Light, lost in an MK Ultra house of Anu. Do tell. Let's start. What the heck is going on with MK Ultra?
In general, or in the case of what I'm writing about with my dad?
Well, yeah. You know what? I'll let you decide. Whichever you think is most relevant to help explain to the audience how to even decipher.
I think a lot of people are familiar with or have heard of MK Ultra. Basically, it was the program. By the time it was called MK Ultra, I believe we were into the 1950s. It was how do you thumbnail this? It was a psychological science program that was stood up by the CIA, as a product, a byproduct of the same kind of research that had started with the Operation Paperclip scientists that came from Germany. Now MK Ultra was actually the pursuit, ultimately, to find a way to create a mind-controlled assassin. That's what the CIA, that was big picture, what they were trying to do. Now, there were byproducts that came off of this. One of them was learning how to erase people's memories. One of the biggest ways they used this was through intense hypnosis. They were trying to pursue being able to create and control an assassin who wouldn't know what he or she was doing as an assassin when they were in their normal state, their normal state of mind. But just like in the film The Manchurian Candidate, they wanted to be able to have a trigger, okay, a word or whatever, to turn the switch on so that particular assassin could be operational, go do his or her job, and then when they were done, they could turn the switch off. And when the switch was off, the person, theoretically, could just go about their business in their life. And they wanted to do this for what we call operational security, just to ensure that it was classified. You know, because the assassin, if they don't remember it when the switch is off, then, you know, they won't be talking. This was the goal. This was the objective. And in that, they did all sorts of crazy things that ended up being very heinous things. One of the things they played with was psychedelic drugs, okay? This is where LSD came from. They were going around, the CIA guys, testing LSD on witting test subjects, as well as unwitting test subjects. At one point, you can read about the adventures of the party house that they had in San Francisco, where they would just invite a bunch of different people, and they had the LSD in an aerosol can, and they would just spray this in the air, and they would have people breathing it, and then they would observe how they would react. You know, of course, as you can imagine, a witting.
Jeez,
one of the scientists working it was not witting when, you know, another scientist slipped it into his drink. And you know, he ends up in the hospital.
Oh, what are coworkers for? Of course.
Exactly.
Why not? Jeez.
Another guy ended up killing himself, jumping out of a window as a result of this. And that was one of those things that ultimately in 1973, the CIA was hauled before Congress, and they had to testify about all of this, all these things they had been doing since the early 50s, and all through the 50s, and all through the 60s. Now, where it starts to tie into what I wrote about in Shimmering Light about my dad is when I discovered that during the early days of MK Ultra, the military was very enthusiastic about this technology, and the most enthusiastic branch of the military that really loved this stuff was the United States Air Force. They were the most enthused about MK Ultra, and they eventually started their own MK Ultra technology program. Now, here's the beauty of this, Heidi. We hear about the Church Committee in 1973, where the CIA had to come clean. The DOD and the U.S. Air Force have never had to go before Congress and tell everyone about their MK Ultra program. In other words, they were left out of this. The CIA admitted to what they were doing, but the Air Force has never had to reveal what
Why
they were
am I not
doing.
surprised? They're always the ones that are caught with their hands in the cookie jar when it comes to like military abductions, secret space program, anything and everything out of the ordinary that's abusing the public.
Well, a lot of that gets exaggerated. You know, I'm an Air Force officer, so, you know, reserve, inactive. Let me add that so people don't freak out. And I was a special agent in that group of, you know,
I
evil
forgot
villains.
you were one of them. That's right.
I was an OSI guy, and so I know how the Air Force works in general. I will tell you, they are the most, as far as their public relations goes and stuff like that, they are the most conservative branch. They really strive to. They try. I'm not saying they achieve this, but they try to be. If there's any branch that has the choir boys in it, the Air Force would love to be that branch, because
I wonder how proud they are of you at this moment. Walter, we've got to get to our first break, and
okay.
we'll start off where we left off. You guys are listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering, always, if it's weird, we're here. We're giving you advice and insight on outlandish topics. Phone lines are always open, but I do realize most of you guys listen to us through the app, so you're not listening to us live, so it's okay. But that number is 1-888-919-2355. And I have Walter Bosley, who is just shimmying down the rankings of the United States Air Force and his wrongdoing, his service. that he had. He dedicated to this country, which is. But you're sharing how the United States Air Force did not have to, I don't know, go to confession like everybody else did.
Right.
As if they're untouchable in a lot of ways. Now, why is that when the Navy is a lot older than the Air Force? What is this?
Oh, well, and this is my chance to get a dig in as an Air Force guy.
Oh, here it comes. I know you guys, how you do that.
I hate to say it, but World War II kind of proved that air power is where it's at, baby.
Oh, boy.
And, in the World War I era, remember between World War I and World War II, we had, a couple of guys get in trouble, to the point where they were even court-martialed over saying that same thing, but World War II proved it. There's a friendly little rivalry going on there because, what I think... it's interesting. That's a good question you ask. Why do they seem to be untouchable? Why have they not been made to confess this up? And that gets into, again, one of the things in the book. I think one of the reasons, and I hadn't thought of it this way, so that's a very good question. One of the reasons why probably they've been left alone might be because of a secret space program, right?
Yeah,
because
I was thinking the same.
If this is connected in any way to a secret space program, we don't want to reveal that. So we don't want to haul these guys up and have to spill those beans.
Yeah, and be like, so you really want us to tell everything? Do you really want to make me sweat on the stand? Do you really want to do this to me? Okay, I'll tell everything. It's like, okay, never mind. I guess so see that. So, they got off the hook big time.
And as I say in the book, I don't condemn, and we'll get into this when we start talking about my dad and what might have been done in his case. I still don't condemn them for using this on my dad if they indeed did, because I still, right now, am convinced that he would have, and he and the other guys he worked with, would have agreed to this voluntarily. I think in the 50s it was a new toy, and they were learning new ways to try to keep operational security, to maintain a classified secret. And I could see them, saying to the personnel, hey guys, if you're going to be part of this extra special project, we're using this new MK Ultra stuff, and we're going to be able to, after you're done, we're going to be able to just hypnotize you a little bit, and you won't even have to worry about slipping up and talking about this stuff because it'll suppress it. And I could see my dad and the other guys going, hey, cool, sounds good to me. Let's rock and roll. I could see that. I could see this being, in the Air Force application, at least, where my dad's part would be concerned, I could see this being kind of a naive kind of look at the new toy we've got in our toolbox kind of thing. And then later realizing, oh, heck, look what this does to these guys. Because I do think it affected my dad in a negative way the rest of his life. But I really don't think that it was intended to, or it was something that they knew about but neglected. I think it was just the way it was.
So how do we get our tail ends into space? How did the Air Force get the goods on this, or was it the Navy that got it first?
Well, for the record, I think both of those branches are the ones that make up the whatever the real secret space program is. And I think it all, and I get into this in the book, of course, in great detail. It's all there in documented history about World War II and Operation Paperclip. You had from the 1920s and the 1930s aviation scientists in the United States and Germany, France, other parts of the world, who were pursuing, in a nutshell, the ability to keep a pilot and an air crew safe and functional and alive in high altitudes, okay? Because the guys engineering, the aerospace engineers were trying to build those planes to go faster and higher each day, right? And so you had your aviation scientists. Most of these guys were medical doctors. That's where we get aviation medicine as a field, okay? And that's where, believe it or not, the great advancements in secret space program in space technology really came from, as these aviation medicine scientists were pushing the ability to keep pilots and air crews safe and alive and functional in those high altitudes. Now, what you had was a guy named Colonel Harry Armstrong, who was U.S. Army Air Corps, and he was one of the main instrumental guys behind Operation Paperclip. He was pushing to get, I believe the total was 58 of these German scientists who had been involved in varying degrees with aviation medicine science, okay, to get them into the United States to advance our aviation medicine, or what we call aerospace medicine, after that, for the United States, for the benefit of the United States. Okay, and that really, when you look at the history of Operation Paperclip, and it blew my mind, everybody thinks that it was the bomb that was driving that, and that was very much a big part of it. Okay, but actually, when you dig into the history of Operation Paperclip, you'll see that it was the Air Corps guys, eventually the Air Force guys, and it was really about the drive to get the aviation medicine guys that were all about putting people at higher altitudes. And then, by the time Otis Benson took over aviation medicine for the United States Air Force in the late 40s, early 50s, it became, when you look at what he was doing, it became all about putting man in space, okay? So you've got that context going into the 50s, all right? Really, you've got Benson driving this. You've got the U.S. Air Force driving this through aviation medicine, okay?
You got the UFO that crashed in Roswell that they stole the technology from.
Yeah, well, that's we'll get to that.
Okay. Yeah.
But you got this context. You've got Benson driving this. The U.S. Air Force aviation medicine is going that way. Really put man in space. By 1955, when my dad joins the Air Force. Okay. Now, what happened to him specifically that the book focuses on happened in 1958, and that's where actually we have to come back to Roswell. Okay. So that was good timing. You have Colonel Harry Armstrong. You got Otis Benson, who is involved in this during the Paperclip era. He was involved with Heidelberg and all that at the end of the war, getting them to, bring the Paperclip guys over and stuff. And you've got all these Paperclip scientists right there in New Mexico in 1947. Okay, and a lot of them, again, are these aviation medicine guys. The other ones are the rocket guys, Werner von Braun and them, Willy Ley and Oberth and them. There they are, okay? It's less than a year and a half after, or maybe a year and a half after the end of the war, okay? You got these guys, these Germans, who from the time they were little kids have dreamed about putting man in space. You've got their ingenious rocket engineers, the ones we got, the Russians got their share. You've got the aviation medicine guys, and then you've got the U.S. Army Air Corps, eventually the Air Force, but at the time still the U.S. Army Air Corps, with Harry Armstrong and those guys, and they really dream about putting man in space.
And Harry's no relation to Neil, right?
Right. Not that I ever found. But I didn't look at there could be. So here you have all these guys in the right place with the same vision. The United States, and the Allies have just won the war, right? We're heading right into the Cold War. They're getting a bunch of money thrown their way. They pretty much feel like they can do whatever they want. So I ask the reader, I ask people all the time, what do you think they would have tried? The best the best rocket scientists the United States could get their hands on, the best aviation medicine technology the United States could get their hand on, a bunch of money, and a secret installation out there to do whatever you wanted. I argue that the big secret of Roswell is not that it was extraterrestrial, is that it was the first and classified attempt at manned space travel by the United States, by the United States Army Air Corps and their German scientists right there in New Mexico. I think it was very, very classified because we were already into the Cold War, okay? We did not want the Russians to know that we were attempting to do this, okay? And I think they put them up there, and I think on the way back down is when they crashed. And they were willing
and they grew extra fingers because these things that people described didn't quite look right. Maybe they got distorted.
I don't know. No, there's a problem with these witnesses. Roswell, all this stuff we've heard from all these witnesses and all this stuff really fell apart into a pile of nonsense. The witnesses have
there
either
goes
turned...
the Roswell celebration, everybody. Man, just
What's
dropped.
That?
Well, they have a big, Roswell, New Mexico. It's a big thing
Yeah,
down there.
well, it's big money now. They've got to keep doing that. Because the local merchants probably rely on it. It's that's a separate thing. But I hate to tell them, the Roswell as ET event whole thing has fallen apart. It doesn't.
You
have
just
legs
lost your space in their parade. That's all I'm going to say, Walter.
Oh, I lost my space in their parade a while ago.
Goodness.
But I think they were willing to let anything get out there, let people believe anything other than it was a first manned attempt. Okay, so, yeah, flying saucer, oh, yeah, that's it. Okay, grays, oh, great, these people are going off on this tangent now for 50 years that this is going to be aliens. Wonderful, great cover. Okay, now, that is what I think very possibly Roswell was.
Now, do you have this perspective? Because I have met people who claim to have worked for the government and who imitated abductions, though they weren't abductions. So does this come to you because you have heard of the same kind of project of our government abducting people, trying to make them believe they were aliens doing it?
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that because there is just so much untruth and nonsense that gets mixed up in that whole thing that I.
You are so Air Force. Oh my gosh!
No. Be specific. You've had people tell you that they've been abducted to convince them that Roswell was an ET event.
No, people that worked for the government who were ordered to create fake abductions to make people believe they were abducted. That's why I'm wondering if that's a connection.
Sorry, that's it's. We were talking about Roswell, and I was just trying to find the connection there. That's a whole other the military abduction thing. That's a whole other topic.
Well, I mean, literally, just like the reboot of the X-Files. It was the government faking alien abductions, making people think that they were being taken by aliens when there was no such thing. It was all people doing it in our government. So,
and when I was saying they were willing to let anything cover for Roswell,
yes.
I was addressing specifically back then in 47 and then in the subsequent years.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
The abduction thing, that's something that I think started later but or was being done by somebody else, which again, there's another topic that is very interesting in itself. But specifically on Roswell, when you look at what happened, what we're told, what we think happened, what we hear, I propose that when you look at the historical context, the most likely explanation is this first manned space attempt that they wanted to keep classified. Now, to answer, two things come out of this. Number one, why and how would this first manned attempt remain so classified for all these years? Well, if in the 50s they were able to stand up a secret space program that continues to this day, there's your reason why and how they could keep the real truth behind Roswell, as I propose it, a secret. Because if it's an ongoing thing, they have ways to clamp down on that. Now, the other point I said that comes up with this, though, is my dad's story. My dad says he was shown the debris from Roswell and the bodies, and his version differs from that suggestion I make about the manned classified program. In his version, it's not extraterrestrials. He was very adamant about that for all the years, that it was not extraterrestrials, it was not grays. What he says he was told when he was briefed in on this in 1958 at Wright Pat was that it was a civilization that exists on this planet parallel to our own, and that what crashed was one of their flying craft, and the bodies were people from their civilization that were as human as you and I, but the way he described them was, yeah, they were a little bit smaller in stature, and they were virtually hairless. That's what he was shown. That's what he was told about who they were and where they came from, because he was told, he and the guys he was working with that were getting briefed in on this, they were told, it has happened again. This civilization has crashed another vehicle, and they have come to us now to request we assist in the retrieval of their pilot, their air crew, or whatever. And
wow, they got to start. They have to have an age limit on their driving. But okay, so when you say a parallel civilization, are we talking about underground, parallel universe? What are we speaking of?
He said, my dad said, that what he was briefed at Wright-Patterson was a human civilization that had gone subterranean a long time ago when there had been some type of cataclysm on the surface of the earth. And some of us came back up, a lot of us stayed back down there, and those people who stayed down there developed their own civilization with technology a little different than ours, in some ways a little more advanced.
What was the benefit of your father being briefed on such a thing? Because they're so secretive. Why would he need to know that? Was his position, I don't know, part of covering up?
No, his position was, he was a physiological training specialist within the aviation medicine field of command, okay? He worked for, essentially, Otis Benson's aerospace medicine division of the Air Force. And what is a physiological training specialist? These are the guys, they run pilots through altitude chambers. They give the briefings and lectures to when pilots are learning about flying at high altitude, the effects on human physiology, that kind of thing. They also they do the ground testing and some flight testing of pressure suits and oxygen system technology. My dad used to go up in jet aircraft in the back seat, in the passenger seat, when they would test out equipment, make sure it was working right. Most of that was done on the ground. His unit at George Air Force Base did the ground testing for the Mercury space program suits. Now, a lot of people say, oh, but that was NASA. Not originally. Mercury was the manned program assigned to the United States Air Force before NASA even existed. The U.S. Air Force had been developing the technology that led to Mercury, and they were continuing to develop it when NASA was stood up in late 1958, and then Mercury, the public part of it, was handed off to them. My dad's unit at George was involved in the ground testing of those silver pressure suits you see in the movie The Right Stuff and the history films that the Mercury astronauts wore.
Okay. I learned something, and this may seem really silly, but I was stunned to learn this. I met one of the Red Tails guys, and I was curious. I'm like, you're flying around for who knows how long. I'm like, how do you use the bathroom? And I just really was curious. He's like, diapers. What? I was like, right there.
And little urine bags, they just kind of hook up.
My gosh. I was stunned. I'm like, I just had to ask it because he's in his 90s and he's like, oh yeah, the diapers. I'm like,
sure.
I would have drawn the line right there. I would not want to be a pilot. But
now you know why they invented, the space toilets and stuff like that. Those guys are probably tired of wearing that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But that explains why people say, why would your dad be briefed on this stuff, a staff sergeant? Well,
yes.
Because he was a physiological training specialist and did all those things. And because he did the things I just explained, he had a very high clearance because he worked with space program stuff, U.S. Air Force space program stuff. And as I discovered on a form from the 50s, the George Air Force Base Form 101 that described his duties, one of the duties he was assigned to was a little something called Casualty Collection Team Number 1. Folks, that's a retrieval. That's crash retrieval. Now, that's aircraft, human remains, that kind of thing, but it qualifies you, and when you add the clearance he had, should something fall from another world, who do you think they're going to get? They're going to get, remember, this is 1958. This is not nowadays when you got all these super commando teams. This is 1958. You know, my dad was on this casualty collection team. And I remember when I was a kid, him talking about the crashes, and they'd have to go out there, you know, when the jets would crash and the pilots he knew and stuff would crash. But, you know, so there you go. You have what he did in his job that put him in, you know, working with U.S. Air Force Space Program technology, which required the high clearance, okay? And you have him already trained and a part of this casualty collection team, you know, this kind of work. So when this happens out in Arizona, he was in training at Gunner Air Force Base back in Montgomery, Alabama. That's why he and the guys he worked with, the other guys who did the stuff he did, were taken up to Wright-Patterson and briefed in on Roswell.
I see. A question from the chat room. Russ is asking, how does the guest decide who's telling the truth when so many are sharing disinformation, misinformation? But when it's your dad, I think it's easier to decide. I take it.
Yeah. You know, what do I say? You know, this is something, as I say in the book, and as I said elsewhere, you know, this is something he started telling me around 1974 when I was a kid, and, you know, it stayed consistent for, you know, almost 40 years, and then I go on to have a clearance and work in the spook world, and, you know, I'm an Air Force officer and an OSI agent on top of that with a fairly respectable clearance within that organization, and you know, I was kind of recruited into this as a young guy by a mentor who passed away last year, an uncle of mine, and he had 44 years in the intelligence business and some interesting things in his past, and, you know, he was kind of a superior officer. It's too long of a story to get into it, but during my career, you know, there was kind of a level of reporting to him, you might say. Okay,
I see. But here's another kind of
these things and brief me in on some of these things too.
Well, here's a question that should be pretty obvious. Like, why on earth would the Air Force allow you to continue to research and write about these things? Because you don't go deep enough, or are they feeding you the angle to go at? I mean, how are you sitting here doing this?
Yeah,
safely?
First of all, the U.S. Air Force, believe me, has nothing, no involvement with what I'm doing. I'm sure that somebody in OSI, you know, kind of keeps their ear cocked and one eye aimed my way. But look at it this way. What I've done with this book in particular is I've written about my dad. I've written about something that happened in the late 50s. You know, a story that he was telling me for 40 years. Most of my book is scholarship that digs into World War II era history and Operation Paperclip history. You know, I framed this within a context of documented historical evidence, and I'm using the documentation from his service. Interesting thing was they didn't get me his personnel file until after I had to release the book. You know, it was time to release the book. I released it, and then a couple months later I get the personnel file from the Air Force.
I assume he's not collecting a pension now.
Oh, my dad died 9 years ago. He was essentially murdered. He was assaulted by a former employee, and it took him like about a year to die in hospitals. So
that's horrific.
For 9 years, and when he got out of the Air Force, he didn't retire. So no, he was never. In fact, I don't think he ever even used his veterans medical benefits until, you know, maybe around the year 2000, 2001. So no, you know, there's no Air Force pension. There's no, you know, they haven't sent anything to me yet. Now, again.
I hate to hold you there, but we got to go to our next break, and then we'll pick right back up. You guys are listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering, always if it's weird, we're here, and that's why Walter Bosley is joining us right now. You know, it's getting deeper. It's getting even more fascinating. Secret space program is a really, really hot topic these days. A lot of people who were somehow involved or connected or getting memories back are talking. And here it turns out that your father was kind of in it from the beginning, and you kind of did a tag team with your uncle and yourself, looking into some of these topics incognito. Is that what you're kind of leading up to with what your role was with some of this?
Well, let me say this. I don't want to give anyone the impression that just because I was an OSI agent doing what I did for 6 years, that I was privy to everything the U.S. Air Force, the DOD, was up to.
Oh, left hand never knows what the right hand's doing, I'm sure.
When you think about it, one of the reasons why an organization like OSI exists is because we had bad guys, okay? You know, that was kind of part of it. We had to watch out for them bad guys that would get in and violate things. And, you know, so I'm not naive. You know, I just am, my personal experience, you know, was not with a nefarious U.S. Air Force in general. Now, yeah, I had one of my guys working for me once when I was at Wright-Patterson for 3 years. That's where I was chief of a counter-espionage operations branch. And one of my guys, he once said to me, look at me, he said, you're here. He goes, you have a personal mission with your career. I'm looking at him. Okay, what's he getting at? He says, you're on a quest. And I looked at him, and he just kind of smiled at me. He says, you're on a personal quest. He goes, yeah. He goes, you do the job right. You're dedicated to the job. You know, he goes, I'm not implying that you're not. He goes, but this whole thing for you, FBI, OSI, whatever you'll do after this, he goes, you're actually on some type of personal quest. And that was where it ended. And, yeah, he was right. I'll put it to you this way. When my mentor first started working me overtly, because he'd been watching me since I was a kid, when he first started working me, I was in my mid-20s, early 20s, and I had just gotten out of college. And, you know, he saw the books I had. He saw the things I was interested in. And he says, you know, you're interested in all this curious stuff, UFOs and other dimensions and all this strange stuff. He says, you know, a good way to learn more about that and to really see what's going on would be, you know, to go into the spook world, what we call, you know, that's the age-old term for the spy world.
Okay.
And national security and stuff. And that really flipped the switch.
So that puts you on your mission even more so. Okay. So, you know, he was the one that said, go work for the FBI, go apply to the FBI, and I did. So what did you come across? So secret space program, what did you come across that allowed you to get a wider understanding of what's going on out there? Like I mentioned during the break, it's like it's absolutely frustrating for people like myself who have seen things, seen beings, seen craft, have been harassed by the government more times than I care to count, and absolutely aggravated, and know that they know what I know, but they want to say, you don't know what you think you know. You know, then why ask me questions? They're interrogating people like myself to get answers or to see how much I do know. And it's like, okay, you know, why the shenanigans? It gets old. It's infuriating. Nothing in my life makes me more angry than their garbage that they have done in my life and others, incognito, mind you. But they, you know, this is another thing. I'm a human being just like these other human beings. Some of them probably not. They're probably lizards in the government, and think that I can't handle it, but only they can. I mean, who are they to tell me I can't handle the truth? So what the heck is going on? What's going on?
You know, you may not buy what I'm saying.
That's fine. Hey, I understand.
There could be people out there that are just, you know, there are guys out there that are very clumsy with what it is they're supposed to do. There are things people are seeing out there that honestly are just our advanced technology, and they want to know, what the person saw, where they saw it. They want to know their impressions of it. And there are things out there from other worlds that certainly people are seeing, and an organization like the Air Force wants to know who's seeing them and, what they're seeing happen. It's all there. Everything you said, I'm not going to say didn't happen at all, because based on, what I was told, based on what I've been convinced, people know that just because I'm critical of, like, these whistleblowers, okay? Anybody who knows me, we could get in a whole conversation about some of these recent whistleblowers, and they're full of crap, okay? But that's another subject. That doesn't mean that I don't think E.T. is out there. Of course I think E.T. is out there. I've been
He's
convinced
just not
of that.
visiting, huh?
And they are visiting, and they've been visiting ever since, of course. But they don't expect all of it, okay, that everybody's seeing. But there are people out there that are making things up to get attention, okay? Or, honestly, they have an experience that freaks them out or scares them, and, some folks out of that, they extrapolate or just exaggerate what happened to them. Some folks, not all of them. So
because this isn't the business to be in if you want to make some money, just so people know. Attention.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that most of us learn that.
Yeah.
But as far as these whistleblowers, the money that is in this field is being pushed behind them, and there's an agenda there. Okay.
Okay. So what's going on? What is this? What is this garbage?
Which particular garbage? There's a lot of garbage.
The garbage about our government hiding. What are they doing out in space? What's the big secret?
Consider this. Maybe, what you've got, and this is what my new book's going to go into, what you've got since World War II, unfortunately, is that nefarious, rotten, evil military-industrial complex. Call it a cabal, call it whatever you want. But a deal was made with the devil at the end of World War II, okay? And I suggest that all these negative things you're talking about, all this stuff, that is the activity and the product of this military-industrial complex thing that Eisenhower warned about, okay? And unfortunately, it has infected. Yeah, it's infected our military. It's infected our industry. That's what the whole military-industrial complex problem is this infection. And so to answer your question, what have they got to hide? Well, I would venture to say what they got to hide is their breakaway group, their breakaway civilization, their secret space program. Okay, their activities. Now, why are they willing to go this far to treat people this way and do all this nefarious stuff?
Right.
Is because for decades they've been the big guys on the block. They've been the ones calling the shot and controlling things. Okay, so that's why some personnel, we'll call them, are given the freedom and the margin to do, really rotten things to witnesses and play with MK Ultra and with the mind. So that's what I'm saying. I don't doubt what you're saying about this stuff happening. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. What I'm saying is, and I'm hoping to do this with the new one when it comes out here real soon, in a few weeks, is to help people really aim the spotlight on the right bad guys. And it's not going to be. It's going to be stuff you're going to be familiar with. But what I do is I think I bring it into a very tighter, specific focus. It'll be the first time that I will actually point to and name names in our present day. Up to this point, I've dealt with historical, the last 150 years primarily, leading up, and I haven't really got current. I'm about to go current.
Nice.
I'm about to tell you, I think, who I think are the ones that did these rotten things to you and some other people. Okay, and why it's dangerous, very dangerous for us today. I had kind of a bit of a shocking enlightenment in this research, which is why I'm compelled to do this new book. And, I've got some associates that kind of pointed me in that direction or are going, you finally see, right?
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, I do.
It's something that my first book that I touched upon, my book is called The Secret War, and it had to do with the darker beings, which ones are pulling the strings of what, how they're intertwined with the government, and how the government sold their souls and some of ours to the devil. So I speak your language. I get you. So, yeah, it is.
And because I know that, here's the thing. I believe in being honest and objective, all right? Right. Where the Air Force or the U.S. military does something bad, I'm going to say it. But where people are, wrong about that and where they do good, I'm going to say that too, right?
Awesome.
And a lot of times people just want to paint it all with the one brush, and that's not fair. That's not right, because it's not the truth. This is, the issue of the truth is why I have trouble with these whistleblowers that keep being thrown at them. Okay, these guys who say this stuff have nothing to back it up, and the stories just get wilder, and they've got some power, where the money is, in this field is being put into them. People got to ask themselves why, okay? Because there's an agenda. Okay, they want people to think a certain thing. They're pushing people in a certain direction, or they're pushing people away from another direction. All right, the direction they're pushing you away from with these ridiculous so-called whistleblower stories is to get you away from the people that are pointing to what is the more factual-based stuff, because that will uncover them faster than any of the nonsense. They want people paying attention to. When I was 16, I was sent to Mars for 20 years to be a space commando, and then they timed me back to 16 years old 5 minutes later. Or the latest guy that I heard last night, when I was in the recruiting, in 1978 from the Marine Corps, I was, taken through a door down through this tunnel, and I, for 20 years I was, on the moon and doing all this, fighting in space, or this secret space program, and then they time traveled me back to that very day I was being recruited. Give me a break.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, it gets deep. It gets deep.
Even BS. They sell more fertilizer than Home Depot does every year.
But we do know, I think a lot of us do realize that there are people being sent up into space. Yeah. But how far are they going and how long are they going? Do you have some understanding
here's
of that?
I think the closest thing I've heard that sounds logical and possible to me is like some of the stuff that this McKinnon guy, Gary McKinnon, talks about, where, what did he say he found? He said he found lists of personnel and ships and stuff like that. Here's what I think, that there is a secret space program. It is more advanced than NASA, obviously. But it's not Star Trek. Okay, it's not. We don't have a Star Trek.
You just ruined my dreams. Okay.
Exactly. We don't have physical. We don't have some. I'm going to say 90%. We probably don't have some door you can step through on Earth and then end up on Mars. I'm not 100% that we don't on that, but that's a whole other conversation. But the thing is, here's my beef. It's not so much that what these guys are claiming is totally impossible and out of the question. Here's the problem I have with it, is it's not as advanced as they spin it up to be. For instance, I think an interplanetary ship is very much like being on a U.S. Navy submarine, but in space. That's what I think those crews face. Okay, that's what I think those do. I think we put boots on Mars a long time ago. Of course, I think.
So how far do you think that we've gone? I mean, what kind of evidence have you come across?
Who knows? I can't say. I'm not in the secret space program. Because think about it. If they've been doing it secretly since the 1950s, my gosh, think what they could have accomplished. But here's my other beef with the whistleblower guys, is the people who would really have been in the secret space program, okay, they don't need to be time traveled back to their 16-year-old bodies, and mind swiped like that. Okay, I think what they are, or what we in the military call good soldiers, good airmen, good sailors, or whatever. They do their duty. They keep their mouth shut. Okay.
Right.
The secret space program duty might just be, hey, I'm a submariner in the United States Navy. Okay, and for 2 years I was assigned to the U.S. Orion, let's call it. Okay, or the U.S. Lollipop. Okay, and for those 2 years, I was on classified missions between here and Mars, okay, or here in the moon or whatever. And then, they come back and they, do their careers on an aircraft carrier or, whatever. I think it's probably something like that. Of course, you might have guys that spend their entire career in this secret space program. I'm not saying that you necessarily wouldn't. But I think that, it's what I think the reality is it's a little bit more down to earth than people think it is or want to think it is.
But you've only come across the fact that it exists, but not so much the inner workings of it.
Through my analysis and my research and my personal experience with, how things can actually remain classified in spite of people's cynicism, the dedication of military personnel when working on a classified project, just what little I've been exposed to the Air Force secret technology in my level of classification, and things I've been briefed into, and things I've been told by superiors. Yeah, I'm personally convinced when you add all that, plus the historical context I talked to earlier, yeah, I'm personally convinced that we do have a secret space program. We would be idiots if we didn't.
Now, are we the only country going up there?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Who's our biggest competition? Russia, right?
Well, the Soviet Union used to be our biggest competition, and I can say that. I worked against those guys every day for 12 years of my career. Okay, but now we have this country called Russia, and if we're smart, we would be friends with them.
As long as they stop messing with us.
I don't think. Well, look, the intel agencies, we mess with them. We're doing everything they do, and here's the thing: they're not doing half the crap they're being accused of.
Well, who's to say?
Wrong. If some GRU agent knocked on my door right now and said, "Hey, Walter, come work for us," I'd say, "Piss off! I'm, a U.S. Air Force officer. Former. Go away. You guys know me better than that. Go look in my file in Moscow." But what I'm saying is, we're in a very dangerous time. I'm going to get into this in the new book.
Okay.
The public's being spun things left and right about what country, this, that, and the other. It's very scary right now, and it's exactly where this group behind the military-industrial complex wants to keep us. And there's other nations out there that are doing their own secret stuff in space, certain ones, not a lot. And I think there's the issue of the breakaways. I think they're out there, of course. Unfortunately, because they're, behind, the rise of our military-industrial complex, they've got their tendrils into our thing. So this is part of the problem. But there is hope.
Yes. There's always hope, right? It's got to be. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean... There are so many different levels to what is going on out there in regards to our new technologies that are just popping up left and right, and the space program, potential alien abductions, alien interferences, interdimensional beings. I mean, it's so much. It's like we could talk for weeks and we will never touch upon everything that is known out there, or that you've experienced, or I've experienced, or others have. It's deep, and it's like, how do we get this message out there?
Well, by doing what we're doing now. And, you touched on something there that in my book, which you've read, I leave a whole thing kind of open, and that is, there are clues and there's evidence. This is kind of where the title comes from, the subtitle, Lost in the MK Ultra House of Anu. I talk about this group of beings, human, but from somewhere else that have certain interdimensional qualities about themselves that are in the mix here. And I don't know to what degree. And, I talk about that in the book. And, you're right. Amid all this nefarious human stuff going on here on Earth, we do have these ETs. We've also got these others from, the other dimensional possibility that are in the mix. There's a lot going on here, and that's why people get confused, and that's why organizations want to know what they're experiencing, and it scares some people. They say there's some guys out there assigned to take it head on, and that's that group, the Collins Elite, that Nick Redfern has talked about and written about, who I think is a very real group.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
It's all in the mix.
Yeah, you've got, I'm looking at your site. I want people to have a chance to check it out. So I want you to tell them what your site is where they can get all of your books.
Oh, well, I'm no longer on Amazon Kindle. Only the Disneyland book is at Amazon on Kindle. Amazon is not good to authors and indie publishers, just for the record. I want to say that. So I pulled all my books off of them. I am at lulu.com, Lulu.com, where you can get my books. They're a little bit more than Kindle, but they're printed. You get a printed physical book in your hands, and that's where you can find all my books. I have a blog, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, which I get on there when I can and post essays and research-related things. If you've never been there, there's a whole bunch there. You can scroll back through time and catch up on it. My fun stuff, my fiction publishing company, you can look at the blog there, Lost Continent Library at blogspot.com. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, and I also have the Walter Bosley channel on YouTube, where you can see my curmudgeonly, cranky commentary about whistleblowers and other things. I'm not always ranting, but people seem to enjoy those.
Hey, I like when you show your teeth. I mean, that's all good.
Sometimes you have to.
Honestly, you do. I mean, there's so much to cover, and it's like, and when you're passionate about something, it really shows, and it shows when you're speaking on this topic. And we need more people like yourself to give a different perspective. And you can't saying you can't swallow everything that people are dishing out there, because you've been in the mix, your family's been in the mix, and you're like, dude, no, that's not right. And
I like to remind people, I'm an experiencer of things myself. Okay, I just choose not to talk about all of it all the time. When you see me publicly, my research and stuff, I try to be objective. I try to provide documentary evidence, if not that historical context. And I admit when I'm speculating. I admit when I don't know something.
And I didn't even push you on any of it. Oh my gosh, well, I'm slipping. I could have totally dug into any of your weird experiences. I dig those the most, of course. But
I'll have to come back.
Oh gosh, you better, and then it will all be the juicy self experiences, right?
Yeah, I will. I'll talk about that stuff. I just usually don't write about it.
I hear you. Well, I mean, I wanted to get into so much that you cover, because it is unique, it is family for you, and it is your career as well. So I mean that's a rare combo that you don't hear of much out there. So I really appreciate you. Taking the time to join us this evening and covering so much. You really crossed the spectrum.
I appreciate you having me on. I really do, and I want your more skeptical listeners to know that I am not the bad guy Air Force guy. I am not the bad guy OSI guy. I'm actually probably more their friend than they realize. And for the record, for all I know, OSI, they might hate me now.
Yeah, I was curious.
They might say, that darn Bosley, we wish he'd shut up. He's an embarrassment. I don't know.
Are you speaking anywhere? Are you going to be doing any events?
I'm going to a little private gathering that I've gone to a couple of times in New Mexico. I'll be visiting Joseph Farrell. I'll be possibly visiting Lynn Buchanan.
Cool.
That's kind of a private gathering where we put our heads together and we.
Well, you can't go to Roswell.
And been to Roswell once, just in that capacity as a tourist. Gotcha. I'm not scheduled to be speaking at any events. All right. But if you got one, I'm
Okay. All right. Well, thank you once again, Walter Bosley, for joining us. And you guys, we've come to the bottom of another awesome program. This was a lot of fun, as always. Oh, my gosh. But remember, you can catch me here every Friday at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. You've been listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering always, if it's weird,